By the mid-17th century, the Ottoman Empire had reached both its height and its cracking point. The Sultan ruled the world's most powerful Muslim empire. But within the soaring domes of Topkapi, power did not only lie with the Sultan. It pulsed quietly behind latticework screens, whispered through the corridors of the harem. This was the era of the Sultanate of Women, a period when the mothers, top of this pyramid, was the valid sultan, the sultan's mother, who ruled over hundreds of concubines, slaves, and attendants, like a queen without a crown. Safety and escape. Some concubines rose to greatness. Others vanished without a name. New girls were brought in, constantly captured in raids, sold by desperate families, or gifted by foreign emissaries. Most were between 13 and 16. Few ever saw their homes again. Once inside, their identities were stripped, their names changed. They were trained in music, poetry, and the erotic arts. Their entire existence became a game of survival by seduction. But under the velvet and incense, the rules were cruel. A girl could spend years currying favor only to be passed over, or worse, fall pregnant and be seen as a threat to the valid's influence. And then, a golden one, yes, but a cage, nonetheless. And when the Sultan himself was unstable, paranoid, and dangerously lonely, the cage could become an oven. In 1640, following the death of Sultan Murad IV the Ruthless, iron-fisted ruler known for executing his own brothers, new sultan was crowned. His name was Ibrahim I, but history would remember him by another name, Ibrahim the Mad. For nearly 2 decades, Ibrahim had been kept in isolation, locked inside the cage, a windowless set of apartments deep within the palace. He'd been told little of the outside world. He wasn't allowed to rule. He wasn't even sure if he was allowed to live. They told him his brothers had been murdered. They told him it was for his own safety. So when the doors finally opened and he was placed upon the throne, Ibrahim did not emerge a leader. At once, he clung to superstition, obsessed over omens, and saw betrayal in shadows. And when he entered the harem, his harem for the first time, for control, he demanded only the most voluptuous concubines, believing their flesh could protect him from black magic. He believed certain women carried healing energies in their wombs. He feared poisoning, betrayal, even shape-shifting witches. He surrounded himself with advisors, too afraid or too opportunistic to stop him. And so the women kept coming, and the women kept disappearing. At first, no one dared speak, but the whispers started soon enough. There was a room, they said, a hidden chamber beneath the baths, and from it rose steam and screams, and the smell of boiling blood. Long before he was sultan, Ibrahim was just a frightened child, a prince, raised in the shadows of death. He was born in 1615, the youngest son of Sultan Ahmed I and Kaiksim Sultan, one of the most powerful women in Ottoman history. Kaiksim had navigated the deadly maze of court politics with unmatched brilliance, surviving where other women perished. But even her cunning couldn't shield her youngest son from the terror that awaited. When Sultan Ahmed died, a brutal tradition returned. Fratricide, the execution of royal brothers to prevent future succession disputes. Ibrahim was still a child when he began to witness his brothers vanish. One by one, they were strangled with silk cords. Ottoman law forbade shedding royal blood, but not killing royals. He clung to his mother, hiding behind her robes, begging not to be taken. And Kaiksim, using every favor and every ounce of her power, managed to spare him, but survival came at a cost. At just 9 years old, Ibrahim was locked away in the cage. This wasn't a literal prison. It was far more psychological, stripped of ambition and drowned in paranoia. No friends, no family visits, no sunlight, no purpose. Time blurred, sanity frayed. Outside his window, executions continued. Inside, Ibrahim waited and listened to the whispers that he'd be next. His tutors called him sensitive, the guards called him quiet, but inside, even as the empire outside convulsed with war, plague, and rebellion, sultans rose and fell. His brothers died. Advisors whispered in marble halls, but Ibrahim stayed locked, awaiting in velvet isolation. He began to hear voices, some in his head, others through the walls. Sometimes they called him Sultan, other times corpse. He saw patterns in tiles, omens in the shape of clouds. He developed compulsions, chewing cloth, refusing to bathe, demanding only white food. He'd weep for hours, then scream without warning. And always, he feared his food was poisoned to the outside world. He no longer seemed like a prince. He seemed like a liability. But fate wasn't finished with him yet. In 1640, when Sultan Murad IV, his brutal older brother, died, Ibrahim, the mad one, was physically dragged from the cage. At first, he refused to believe his brother was dead. He wept, thrashed, demanded to see the body. When the corpse was finally shown to him, he collapsed in shock. Even then, he whispered, "This is a trick. He's pretending." But there was no trick. The throne was truly his. And so, after 22 years of isolation, Ibrahim was crowned Sultan of the Ottoman Empire. But he wasn't ready. Not mentally, not emotionally, not spiritually. He emerged not as a ruler, but as a fractured soul, a child, wearing the crown of a god. And worse, he had something to prove, that he was powerful, that he was feared, that he was no longer the one being locked away. He would rule through desire, through domination, through fear. And those closest to him, the women of his harem, would pay the price for his broken mind. At his side, one figure remained, watching, guiding, whispering, Kaksum Sultan, his mother. Now the valid Sultan, she was the true power. Behind the throne, for years, she had played the palace like a chessboard, outwitting rivals, arranging alliances, and even orchestrating assassinations. But even she could not predict what her son had become. At first, she tried to help him rule. She shielded him from court politics, eased his paranoia, and flooded the harem with new concubines, thinking that passion would calm him, that fatherhood would anchor him. It didn't. Ibrahim developed a fixation with fertility and flesh. He demanded concubines with exaggerated features, believing that larger bodies were more fertile, more magical. He surrounded himself with mystics and charlatans who told him his destiny was written in the stars and in blood. His obsessions deepened. He began hoarding furs, dozens of sable pelts, with which he lined his clothes, his bed, even the harem walls. He believed they repelled evil spirits. He ordered fish from the Bosphorus to be brought to his chamber so he could scream at them. And then came the night he declared, "They are trying to curse me through the womb." From that moment on, the harem changed. Suspicion festered like rot. Servants were flogged for glancing too long. Concubines were interrogated under candlelight. Some were found hanging, others simply vanished. And when Kaksum tried to intervene when she begged her son to stop, to rest, to trust. He looked her in the eyes and saw a traitor. The boy who once clung to her robes now stared at her like she was the executioner. "You let them lock me away," he whispered. "You fed me to ghosts. Simply become." It began with whispers, a name missing from the morning roll call, a pillow left untouched, a silk slipper abandoned near the fountains. At first, the concubines didn't dare speak of it aloud. Women disappeared in the harem, all the time disgraced, punished, reassigned, but this felt different. These women weren't being relocated. They were being erased. And always, they had one thing in common. They had recently shared the Sultan's bed. Ibrahim's sexual appetite had grown monstrous. In a single night, he would demand 10, sometimes 20 concubines to bathe him, touch him, sing for him. He would obsess over physical details, fixate on omens and dreams, and then abruptly turn cold. One day, a girl would be his sacred jewel. The next, he wouldn't even acknowledge her. The girls he tired of were rarely seen again. And soon, fear gripped the harem like a noose. No one wanted to be chosen. They cried in corners when their names were called. They scratched their faces before entering his chambers, hoping disfigurement would make them invisible. Some swallowed broken glass or needles to avoid being blessed by the Sultan. He believed their blood carried curses. He believed enemies had placed demons in their wombs. He believed boiling water could purify flesh. And when one concubine, his favorite, the famed Yuma, dared question his behavior, dared show grief for the missing girls, she vanished too. Servants began finding blood trails near the baths. A cook found long strands of hair tangled in a drain. One terrified eunuch, later exiled, claimed he heard laughter low, male laughter from behind the marble steam walls, as someone screamed inside. And yet, the palace remained silent, because no one questioned the Sultan, and no one defied the horror that wore a crown. It was a eunuch named Hasan who first spoke of the chamber, not to the court, not to the viziers, but in a whisper to a foreign diplomat's servant. Through trembling lips and tear-filled eyes, he spoke of a hidden room beneath the imperial baths, deep in the bowels of the harem complex, past a locked iron grate guarded day and night by mute sentries. "It is always warm there," he said, "even in winter, and the water does not smell like water." The chamber had no official name. No one was permitted inside but the Sultan, a handful of loyal slaves, and the women who never returned. Some said it was a place of ritual cleansing, others of exorcisms. But Hasan had seen more than steam. He described a pit, circular, lined with brass and carved with strange, foreign symbols, large enough for a body. He spoke of chains anchored to the walls and thick wooden beams stained dark red. He claimed a tunnel beneath led to the Bosphorus so blood could be washed out to sea, unseen. "He wears no robe when he goes there," Hasan whispered. "Only a crown and a smile." This wasn't execution, it was performance. The Sultan had become convinced that evil spirits had infected his bloodline. He believed the concubines were spies of dark force sent to tempt him, poison him, weaken him. Only through fire and boiling could the corruption be destroyed. And so, when the palace lights dimmed and the incense burned low, Ibrahim would descend. The marble above would tremble, the harem would go silent, and the next morning, the Sultan would reach remerginated, serene, whispering to no one. He had cleansed the wounds of evil, and the empire turned its eyes away. The harem changed. The music grew quieter. The laughter stopped. The scent of jasmine and rosewater could no longer mask the metallic sting that hung in the air. And yet, life inside the palace continued as if nothing had happened. New girls arrived weekly, some from noble families sold into servitude, others from conquered lands. Their faces were hopeful, frightened, unaware. They were told they'd live in luxury, that they might even bear a prince. They were not told about the cauldron beneath the tiles. One girl, Mariam only, 15, was known for her voice. She used to sing during the Sultan's dinners, a lullaby from her village that even made the eunuchs weep. She sang once for him and was summoned again and again, and then never returned days later. One of the older concubines found her embroidered shawl in the corner of the Sultan's chamber, stained and still warm. No one spoke her name again, but at night the girls began humming her song softly, not as a tribute, as a warning. The palace was filled with ghosts, ghosts of women who once danced in its halls, who once dreamed of love, who once dared to speak and burned for it. They lingered in the steam of the bathhouses, in the echo of dripping marble, in the rustle of silk robes. One fled the palace entirely, found naked and shivering in the streets. Muttering, they scream, but the water won't stop. It never stops. Still, no one acted. The Grand Vizier turned his gaze. The imams offered prayers, but no intervention. The court physicians whispered divine madness and left it at that, because the Sultan's sickness was not just of the mind, it had become part of the empire's soul. Beneath the marble of the harem baths, beyond the scent of rose oil, was a chamber, no map recorded, no windows, no prayers, only heat, a massive pit boiled endlessly, brass-ringed, chain-laced, and stoked from below. It wasn't a bath, it was a cauldron. The Sultan called it his purification room. One by one, the women were brought in, drugged, stripped, erased. Ibrahim would sit silently, sometimes blessing them, sometimes whispering scripture, twisted beyond recognition. Then the descent began. Not dropped, but lowered, inch by inch, as if agony itself were sacred. Some died of shock, others screamed until their voices cracked and their skin slipped free. He would whisper verses, cry real tears, sprinkle rose petals into the scalding broth. Not death, he told one terrified servant. Rebirth. The killings followed patterns, moons, moods, omens only he could read. The women were accused of spiritual rot, of carrying demons, of tainting the bloodline. And after death, their bodies were wrapped in coarse cloth and dumped into the sea. No names, no graves. Soon, even his attendants began to shatter. One tore out his own tongue. Another flung herself into the Bosphorus, and still no one stopped him. He was the Caliph, God's shadow on earth. Then came the breaking point. Convinced of a plot, Ibrahim ordered all 280 concubines drowned in a single day. They were dragged by the hair, pushed under. One girl, no older than 13, cried, "Ibrahim Baba, please, I sang for you." She disappeared beneath the water. And after that, the palace fell silent. No more screams, no more steam. Just the soft hum of a man who believed he had purified the world. But the walls had been listening, and the eunuchs began to whisper. For years, they had obeyed. They had delivered the girls. cleaned the corpses. But now, after hundreds of deaths, they began to refuse. "I have delivered enough angels to hell," said Bashir Aga, the first to resist. Doors were left unlocked. Messages passed. Foreign envoys warned. The empire stirred. Outside the palace, famine spread. Trade collapsed. The military floundered. And the people began to murmur. Ibrahim the mad dot inside. The Sultan unraveled. He dyed fountains red, ate only dried figs, slept with a sword. He feared assassins in the walls, demons in the air. But above all, he feared his mother Kaiksem Sultan. She had once protected him. Now she plotted his end. In secret, she met with the Grand Vizier and Janissary commanders. Together, they agreed he must be removed. They gathered testimonies, servants, eunuchs, witnesses to the steam and the screams, financial records, military failures. The evidence was overwhelming. And so, on a night in August 1648, the Janissaries surrounded the palace. They did not raise their weapons. They simply stood. Inside, the Sultan whispered, "They will boil me now, as I boiled them." And in a locked chamber, Ibrahim I, once shadow of God, was strangled with a bowstring. No trial, no public execution, only silence. He wept. He whispered a name whose no one knows. Then he was wrapped, dumped in the tombs of his ancestors. No monument, no mourning, just whispers. They linger still in the baths, in the halls, in the steam that never quite cools. Because no matter how tightly you strangle a monster, you cannot kill a curse.